Surprise, mother... Surprise, mother...
I do believe I'm on fire.
Oh, what's going on? I didn't know it was alright to eat those guys. I better should check the Brobo. Make sure that's okay.
A prisoner awakens in a dark cell. Why he's there, he cannot fully recollect. All he knows is there's something pulsating inside him, something growing, something taking over. Suddenly, a discordant chorus of keys jangles outside his cell. The rusted door groans as it slowly swings open. With monstrous ferocity, the prisoner disembowels his jailer within the blink of an eye. Covered in blood, the man gathers his belongings and sets out in search of the one thing he recalls longing for: salvation. The Last Faith is everything I wanted it to be. A combat-heavy dark fantasy gore fest set in decrepit landscapes, crawling with mutated monstrosities and flirting with cosmic horror. So, Bloodborne. I wanted Bloodborne. From its narrative to its atmosphere to its stupid limited healing items that don't refresh at save points.
Seriously, why would you copy that part from Bloodborne? That was the worst part!
The Last Faith feels like a pretty darn good 2D rendition of the From Software classic if it were made by the fine folks over at the Game Kitchen. But there's certain optics that come with wearing your influences so prominently on your sleeves. Is The Last Faith simply an uninspired ripoff, or does it bring something new to the Metroidvania table? And is it any good? Let's delve into the murky depths of Illigarth and see what we can discover. Eric moves around as fluidly as your typical MV protagonist would. His starting kit includes jumping high, strafing in the air, grabbing and climbing ledges, and canceling attacks directly into backdashes and dive rolls, making combat much more accessible and forgiving compared to the Hunter's Scuffles in Yharnam. Combat itself feels good, with hits being impactful and visceral, adding slight screen shakes, violent blood spurts, and satisfying slashing sounds with each hit. Eric can also choose to fight with some secondary ranged weapons, like a gun with finite bullets that reload at save points called altars, and I guess magic spells / lost technology that uses focus, this game's version of MP. If you want to replenish MP, you also have some choices. Recover at an altar, use an item, or
Fatality.
where you don't have choices, at least not in a meaningful way, is with your starting class. Upon starting, you get 4 classes to choose from, each with varying beginning stats. Brawler starts with higher strength, Rogue is for smelly dex builds, Stargazer is for magic-wielding cowards, and Marksman is the worst in the game because guns are the worst in the game. This all sounds fine, but is ultimately superficial. Each class looks the same and starts with the same equipment, a smelly dex weapon. So I'm not really sure why choosing a starting class matters. It might make sense if the Brawler started with a strength scaling weapon or if the Stargazer started with a spell, but no, regardless of your choice, you're stuck with the stinky dex sword. Thankfully, there are multiple weapons to be found throughout your playthrough. Axes, a whip, katanas, guns, each with their own stat scaling and unique weapon skill. Like magic, weapon skills require focus and can range from being a ridiculously over-the-top flipping ground-destroying slam attack to transforming your sword into a whip to perform quick combos with greater range. All the weapons and their skills are pretty cool and add variety to your approach. But I put all these dinky toys away the moment I found it. The Ethereal Great Blade. Oh, a baby. Finally, the studliest strength weapon in the game. And let me tell you, with its extended reach, you got yourself a real lady pleaser. There's one thing that bothers me about the weapons though. Not unlike most RPGs, each weapon comes with a stat requirement. Take for example the Rift of Blood, a brilliant allusion to Elden Ring. It has requirements for strength, dex, and mind. Based on my build, I don't make the dex requirement, most likely because I don't stink. However, here I am wielding the katana anyway with no restrictions. Regular attacks, charged attack, and the weapon skill intact. I'm not sure why stat restrictions are even implemented in the first place. Perhaps I get significant damage reduction, but it feels odd to still be able to even equip it. Speaking of equipment, The Last Faith made things simple. You can equip 2 main melee weapons at a time, but there's no power stancing, because the devs knew I'd become too powerful. But you can change between weapons on the fly, though you won't be pulling off any stylish triple S combos like Dante from Devil May Cry. Switching weapons requires you to be perfectly still, so it's more about methodically varying your approach than it is stringing together ridiculous multi-weapon combos, which is admittedly the better approach for the game. Sorry, DMC fans.
I should have been the one to fill your dark soul with light!
In your other hand, you can equip 2 secondary weapons, a gun and a magic spell, or 2 guns and 2 magic spells, whatever. They can also be switched on the fly, and I found switching spells to be much more valuable, considering spells have different elemental affinities and enemies have different elemental weaknesses. But my mind was so low, all my spells sucked, so I never used them. I stuck with the old reliable Unga Bunga strats. You can also equip 3 charms, which are basically accessories that add bonuses to damage and resistance as well as other stuff, and something called a stigma. There's only a few stigmas in the game, and they grant abilities that use power, the white bar in the top left corner that refills with every successful attack. I don't want to spoil the late game stigmas, but they're definitely game changing. An early stigma lets you parry and riposte to regain health, which is cool, but there's another stigma you get on the critical path that absolutely breaks the game. We'll be talking about that in the spoilers section. And that's it for equipment. There's no fashion souls or Elden bling here, no hats, no armor, just a sad, unstylish cursed boy. Though I actually like Eric's design. There are items you can equip, up to 5, but fumbling through them during combat wasn't worth the effort. I left my item slot exclusively for healing injections. If I got afflicted with status effects like burn or electrocute, I'd let it either run its course or just die. I'm not the biggest fan of games not pausing the action when I bring up the in-game menu to use items, and I especially hate it when I can't even look at the map without some zombie dog ripping my dick off. Why won't you just let me pause the game, devs? Do you not like comfort? Who hurt you? We've talked about our boy Eric's movement, combat, skills, and equipment, all of which make him a pretty deadly dude. All this comes together to make a nice middle ground between the highly disciplined, rigid, deliberate combat typically found in From Software games and the lol, what even is gravity stylings of a 2D platformer. Add in dodge canceling your attacks, and you have yourself combat that's accessible and is far less punishing for playing overly aggressively. In other words, combat is a whole lot of fun. And combat only gets better as you unlock new map traversal abilities. Admittedly, there's nothing here you haven't seen in an MV already. Grappling hook, air dash, double jump. Eric even gets a gravitational ring that lets him push boxes, just like in Circle of the Moon. But the way these abilities enhance how you approach combat makes up for the lack of innovation. Jumping and dashing around all these slow-moving monstrosities makes you feel like a god. I like the enemy designs in this game. Think Bloodborne, but instead of werewolves, it's Man-Bat from Batman. Corrupted villagers and religious figures, mutated dogs, distorted experiments, and bat-like abominations all litter biomes to make your life miserable and even add some flavor here and there. My favorite was this talking enemy that never passed on an opportunity to talk, even when I was busy with an NPC.
And bask in its warmth, Annika.
Bosses were a spectacle, and their designs looked amazing, though there were 3 that were essentially reskins of large dragons. Many early to mid-game boss encounters were serious roadblocks forcing me to get good. The late-game encounters, not so much. Remember that stigma I mentioned earlier? It completely shatters bosses. But we'll get to that in the spoiler section. It's not time yet. There were a couple boss fights that gave me that finally beat it rush you like to feel after defeating one that's been a bastard for the greater part of a half hour. Most encounters come down to pattern recognition and being patient enough to whittle down their massive HP pools. As long as you can dodge their attacks and get hits in here and there, they'll go down. But one mistake could cost you because they all hit like a truck. It's always frustrating to have a good run only to be puckered by a mistimed jump or dodge. And the limited healing injections do you little favors. I know I brought it up in the intro, but man, limiting healing injections was such a bad idea. You can initially hold 7 injections with any excess going into storage. You use up all 7 in a failed boss attempt, then you better hope you have 7 more in storage, or else you're shit out of luck. The game throws you a bone by giving you 4 injections once you resurrect at an altar, but that's still lame. This then forces you to either grind for injections from enemy drops, or travel back to the game's hub area, Oxneville's Manor, to purchase injections from an NPC, which still requires you to do some grinding because you lost all your currency in the boss battle. Not having unlimited injections is manageable, but it still sucks. And just to be clear, when I say you have to travel back to the game's hub area, the game mercifully lets you fast travel between saving altars. Had they not given you fast travel, that'd be the end of this video, boys. The hub area is the haven for all the NPCs you find throughout your journey. You discover them during your travels, tell them about the manor, and boom, you got yourself a side quest giver or a new merchant. There's one that sells healing items, one that sells spells, and one that upgrades your weapons, who we'll return to in a bit. There are other NPCs that do stuff, but the only other one I want to mention is the Lolita chilling in her carriage outside the manor. She's your only means of leveling up, and I kinda hate it. I get that's how they did it in Bloodborne, but I hated it in that game, so why the hell would I like it any better in this one? I'd have much preferred leveling up at altars. It would have saved a few steps and a lot of time. It's not that big an issue, but it just felt unnecessary. Like, I'm cool with you copy-pasting a lot of stuff from Bloodborne, but did you have to paste the shitty stuff too? As for leveling, you gotta spend Nikrux, the game's currency and EXP. There are 5 attributes to improve, with each attribute affecting stats like HP and MP, your defenses, your resistances, and your damage. I'm not diving into the stats because it'd take forever and be super boring. Just do what I do. Find a weapon you like, see what it scales with, then dump everything into that stat. Occasionally pumping some into vitality so you can take a few extra hits. Maybe mine so you can do more weapon skills. But never instinct, because that increases gun damage, and guns suck. And let's say you find the weapon you want to dedicate this run to, because there's no respecking. Once you level up, that decision's final. Anyway, with your weapon of choice in hand, it's time to visit Meriano, this game's version of a blacksmith.
You pulling the wool over me eyes, laddie.
Using resources you can find and eventually buy, you can upgrade your weapons to do more damage. Improving your weapons is absolutely vital to success, so don't neglect it. It gets expensive and resource heavy, but it pays off. I was cleaving off chunks of late game bosses' HP with every swipe of my fully upgraded lady pleaser. It was a beautiful thing to behold. Exploration in The Last Faith is highly rewarding for the most part. The biomes themselves are fun to navigate and have lots of shortcuts to unlock, which is always exciting to reveal. And the biomes are diverse. There are some that are just long paths with little to no offshoots, some with a lot of verticality, some that are just one huge puzzle filled with locked doors, and some that have you running all over the place. The game largely does a good job with its level design, except when it does unfair drops like this one. But hey, it keeps you on your toes. They used the hit 3 or 4 switches to unlock the boss gimmick like 4 or 5 times, so that formula got a little old, but it didn't bother me too much because there was so much to see and do. There are tons of enemies and traps and arenas, which are basically traps combined with enemies, and secrets. So many secrets, most of which involve either backtracking or hitting false walls. Pro tip, smack every wall in this game, all of them. The amount of false walls in this game is borderline comical. Leave no wall unsmacked. Here's another tip. This one's slightly spoilery, but I think it's worth talking about because it might mitigate a lot of frustration. And I'm having a hard time deciding if it's genius or nonsensical. So, The Last Faith is a linear game, but there are definitely places you can go way before you're supposed to, which I personally love in MVs. Case in point, the frozen biome. Early in your playthrough, there's a box right outside one of the manor's exits that you can interact with once you get the gravitational ring. Of course, being the studious MV enthusiasts you are, you log the area in your brain and immediately return there once you acquire the skill to move the box. This is a bad idea and leads to a mid to late game area you aren't prepared for. It's perfectly fine to visit, but enemies are going to be way too tanky, and the boss I found there was damn near impossible to beat. I was doing only a centimeter of damage with every strike. After wasting an hour on this thing, I finally got it through my thick skull that I probably wasn't supposed to be there yet. But I had no leads, so where do I actually go? Here. You go here. I don't know how I was supposed to know to go here, but go here and talk to this weird guy. You're welcome. Alright, I say this whole scenario is brilliant because I really love when MVs throw me for a loop by offering quick access to biomes where they give out free ass whoopings. But it's also nonsensical because I had no idea I was supposed to go talk to the weird guy once I got the gravitational ring. I had been to this area several times previously without the ring, and there were no hints. Heck, that weird guy wasn't even there until I got the ring. And who even is this weird guy? I saw him twice throughout the game, and we had the same dialogue exchange on both occasions.
A prudent moment.
If he has a purpose or a quest line I missed, let me know in the comments. Fortunately, when you get stuck like I did, it's great that The Last Faith handles backtracking well. So well that I always looked forward to scouring the map with each new ability obtained. Rummaging through Illigarth was always well worth it. New weapons, NPCs, side quest items, shortcuts, blueprints, optional bosses, hidden items to get into secret places to find the secret ending, unborn fetuses. I hate that that last thing is a thing. Point is, backtracking was done right in this game. Not only because there was lots of interesting things to do, but because it was so convenient. Fast travel made backtracking a breeze, and having the option to mark up the map made remembering where to revisit that much easier. Marking up the map's a simple thing, but even to this day, not all MVs do it. I did notice you have a finite amount of markers you can leave on the map, and I eventually ran out of certain tokens, so that was kind of a bummer. All in all, The Last Faith has exceptional exploration that respects the player's time. They even put checkpoints before boss encounters, so you don't have to do the walk of shame after every defeat. So I guess these conveniences balance out the bullshit limitation on healing items and the one-stop shop for leveling. Honestly, those two things aren't that bad once you get into the groove of the game. So I wouldn't focus on those aspects too much if you feel they're deal breakers. As for the atmosphere, what can I say that you can't pick up on your own just by looking at it? It's 2D Bloodborne with the Blasphemous aesthetic. It looks great and sounds great too. Enemy screeches make your skin crawl, the general sound design hits well, and the soundtrack does its job. There were no memorable tracks, at least not for me, but they all conveyed an appropriate sense of gothicness. And the tracks for the bosses were suitably epic. Every environment feels like it feeds into each other naturally to create a believable world. And the often stunning backgrounds and enemy placement do a hell of a job conveying the game's story. I adore the game's atmosphere and art style, even down to the item icons' cloudy and smeared look. Now it's time to talk about the story. Much like the game, I'm going to be vague, mostly to avoid spoilers, but mostly because I was confused by it, and still am. But I think I got the gist. Unlike most Souls-likes, this game's protagonist is an actual character with his own voice, backstory, and motivations. Most interactions with NPCs open up dialogue options that allow Eric to actually ask for clarification on things. You hear a strange new term? Ask the NPC what it is. It's up to you if you find exposition given like this to be good or bad. Personally, I was cool with it. And of course you have the Souls-like staples of environmental storytelling, documents, and lore found in item descriptions. So don't think everything will get spoon-fed to you. I'm still trying to figure things out. I mentioned it earlier, but there are multiple endings, and you can get all 3 endings on a single playthrough. The path to the true ending is, okay, it's involved and I was super excited along the journey, but I just didn't think they pulled it off well enough in the end. I think it's time we dive into spoiler territory now. Go to this timestamp to skip spoilers and hear my experience with the game's performance on the Switch. I'll give you a few seconds because I'm a classy guy like that. First, the true ending. You collect the dude's eyes so you can see the truth, and the truth is that there's another cosmic entity pulling strings behind the scenes. That's cool, but it felt off. Proccing the true final battle automatically just by having these eyes in your backpack is kinda weak. I like it when players have a more active role in activating the true final phase or leg of the game. Like how you have to equip something in Symphony of the Night and Hollow Knight, or how you have to attack something in Ritual of the Night. I did not realize I was going to use Night so many times in that sentence. Okay, here's my fanfic. What if Eric had to equip the eyes in his offhand in order to see the other entity during the fight with Annabella and Katarina? A little too Symphony, but what if you could only see her when you use the eyes, and using the eyes not only requires you to be still, but it also obfuscates your vision with some weird frame around the screen or makes things really zoomed in, making it actually finding this secret entity hard to do. Moreover, You can't attack while using the eyes, and Annabella and Katarina are more aggressive while you use the eyes. Make the arena bigger and have the entity move every time you hit her, and this could be a pretty challenging encounter. Or complete trash. I'm not a game developer. Point is, it'd make the final reveal that much more exciting and memorable. Let's talk about the stigma that breaks the game. It's called the last mark of transcendence, and it allows you to transform into a monster or whatever. I love it, but I think it needs nerfed. It basically mitigates all damage done to you while increasing your damage output and speed significantly. It uses the power gauge to sustain itself, and once the gauge is gone, you revert back to regular Eric. Sounds like a reasonable limitation to such a broken move, but you continually regain power with every successful hit, even while transformed. So I could go into a boss encounter, transform, and then tank and spank until the boss keeled over. There was nothing they could do to me. It felt incredibly empowering, but really took all the threat out of the game. I think a little tweaking on the transformation might be a good thing. There's also this family crests puzzle I thought was really cool, but ended up not being that. At the bottom of the drowned crypt, there's a locked door where you need to insert 4 family crests. 2 of these crests are fairly simple to find, while the other 2 were a little more difficult. One was tough because I couldn't find the damn prison key to open up the doors in the first biome. The place where they hid this key was kinda bullshit, but it was still awesome, especially because those locked doors had been teasing me the entire game, which is something I freaking love in my MVs. And the final crest can straight f off. It requires you to find all 20 hidden fetuses scattered throughout the game. That's a daunting task, especially because there's not a tool or instrument that helps you find them. Thankfully, you don't need to complete this family crests puzzle to beat the game or get the final ending, so I appreciated that at least. So, what does this insanely difficult and game-spanning puzzle reward you with? A dragon reskin boss fight, a note, and a charm I didn't use. It was so incredibly overwhelming that I can't recommend you doing it. Maybe there was some cool lore implication having to do with Dragon Cthulhu, but it went over my head. You do obtain a corrupt heart of Nycrux from defeating the boss, but I have no idea what those things do. Lore-wise they represent something, but mechanically they do jack shit. At least I couldn't find anything to do with them. So here I am with a bag full of hearts and eyeballs like some kind of forgotten black market mule. Fantastic. The last bit of spoilers I want to bring up is a performance thing, so I'll allude to it in the performance section later. During the Lena boss fight, I had to be careful with the transformation because I could literally teleport out of the arena in the middle of the fight, and re-entering the arena would restart Lena at full health. It was frustrating and weird. Hopefully it gets patched out. Now, let's talk about performance. I played The Last Faith on the Switch on launch because I like to have my MVs on the go. I know about the Steam Deck, but I was already collecting on my Switch long before the deck released, so I'm committed at this point. Plus, I collect physical media, which the Switch has much to offer, while the deck does not. Anyway, this game's rough on the Switch. Not always, but anytime there's a larger room, this game crawls, making platforming and combat just awful. It typically runs at a smooth 60 FPS, but these larger rooms can make the game dip between 30 and 20. It's painful. And the map and the menu always felt laggy, so it never felt great using them. And there were times when my aerial attacks just stopped working until I took a hit. Sometimes, character portraits were in the way of items they were giving me. There was also a boss battle I could exit under certain circumstances, which would in turn restart the battle with the boss at full HP, so that was frustrating. And then there was this boss fight. But the worst part was the crashes. I lost so much progress. If you didn't know, Souls-like games' enemies respawn every time you save, so it's not uncommon to skip saving for large swaths of time because you'd rather explore without having to deal with the enemies again. I do not recommend doing this in the game's current state on the Switch. Matter of fact, it might be in your best interest to either get the game on another platform or wait for patches, because the crashes really soured my experience toward the end. Every time I entered another room in the final biome, I prayed to the gaming gods on high that there wouldn't be another crash to set me back. It rarely worked. The game even crashed after I beat the final boss. Even the credits wouldn't roll without the game kicking me to the main menu. Maybe they didn't want their names associated with all the crashing. Hey, this is Editing Luke from the future, where Apparently, I still don't get any sleep. It seems a patch dropped for the Switch version, so I tested it to see what's changed. And I have some good news and some bad news. Which one do you want first? The bad news? Okay. Bad news. The frame rate got even worse in the larger rooms, dipping below 20 FPS sometimes, and now the audio does some weird crackling noise sometimes. Also, the load times have gotten much worse. Ready for the good news? I beat the game again on my old file, and it turns out the credits are rolling now. Yay. I know I was a little harsh near the end of this analysis, but I'm not wrong. The performance issues on the Switch version, as of the making of this video, really dragged the experience down in the late game. I can't speak to how the game performs on other platforms, but I'd imagine they run the game a lot better. I want to push the Switch performance issues aside and return to my original questions. Is The Last Faith simply an uninspired ripoff, or does it bring something new to the Metroidvania table? And is it any good? I think I can objectively state that The Last Faith is a wonderful Metroidvania. Its combat's fantastic, its progression's addicting, its exploration's rewarding and thrilling with backtracking and other features that respect your time. And the atmosphere kept me interested throughout. I may need to watch Vadi Video or Mossbag or the Inhuman one so I can understand the story completely, but from what I was able to gather, I was entertained. The game may not revolutionize the genre, but what it does do, it does very well. And even though it wears its inspirations a little too blatantly on its sleeves, I feel it can stand on its own 2 feet. Sure, it can sometimes be unfair with enemy placement, gank fights, traps, and limited healing resources, but that's kind of the fun of Souls-likes. Needless to say, if you don't like Soulsvanias, I can't recommend this game to you. But if you're down with Souls-like gameplay, you'd be crazy not to give The Last Faith a playthrough. It's a pretty meaty game that took me a little over 22 hours to complete. Though there's no New Game Plus, I'm still itching to play it again, but I think I'm gonna wait for some patches first. Who knows? Maybe I'll do a Dex build for my second playthrough.
You serious?